The Great Emu War of 1932 is one of Australia's most bizarre historical events, where the Australian military attempted to fight a war against emus, large, flightless birds that were damaging crops in Western Australia. Despite being heavily armed and well-equipped, the military's efforts were largely unsuccessful, and the emus ultimately won the war. In the early 1930s, Western Australia was struggling with the aftermath of the Great Depression. Farmers were already facing difficult economic conditions, and the situation was worsened by a series of crop failures. During this time, large numbers of emus began invading farmland, particularly in the wheat-growing regions, attracted by the abundance of food left behind by harvesters. These birds, known for their size and speed, began consuming crops, damaging fences, and creating chaos on the farms. In November 1932, the government decided that something needed to be done about the emu problem. They authorized an unusual solution. They would send the military to deal with the birds. The military, under the command of Major G.P. Meredith, was tasked with reducing the emu population and protecting the wheat crops. A team of soldiers, armed with machine guns, was dispatched to the Campion district of Western Australia, where the emus were most abundant. The soldiers had 2 Lewis machine guns, which were capable of firing 500 to 600 rounds per minute, and around 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The war begins. In early November 1932, the soldiers set out to confront the emus. The first encounter occurred near Campion, where they faced a large group of emus. Initially, the soldiers fired on the birds, but the emus proved to be incredibly difficult targets. The birds are fast and agile, able to run at speeds of up to 50 kilometers per hour, 31 miles per hour, and their large size and long legs made them surprisingly difficult to hit with machine gun fire. The soldiers quickly realized that the emus were able to scatter and outrun their attackers, and they had difficulty bringing down a significant number of birds. Despite firing large amounts of ammunition, the soldiers were only able to kill a small percentage of the emu population. Over the next several weeks, the military continued to pursue the emus. However, each encounter proved equally frustrating. In some cases, the soldiers would try to ambush groups of emus, but the birds would scatter before they could be shot. In other instances, the soldiers would open fire, only to find that many of the emus had escaped, often unharmed. The emu's ability to outrun and evade the soldiers was so impressive that the situation seemed almost comical. The military attempts were further hindered by terrain issues. The soldiers often struggled to move around the rugged, uneven farmland while the emus easily traversed it. Their machine guns were also not as effective as expected, given the nature of the terrain and the birds' quick movements. By December 1932, after several weeks of failed attempts and minimal success, the military withdrew from the operation. The soldiers had killed only about 1,000 emus out of an estimated population of 20,000 in the area, and their efforts had cost more in ammunition and manpower than it seemed worth. The emus had outlasted the war and remained a significant problem for farmers. Despite the failure of the military intervention, the emu problem continued to affect farmers in Western Australia. However, the military's defeat led to a change in strategy. The government eventually introduced other methods, such as bounty hunting, and provided farmers with poison and traps to deal with the emu population more effectively. Interestingly, in 1934, 2 years after the war, the Emu War was humorously recalled in the Australian press as a tragic yet laughable chapter in the country's history. The Great Emu War remains a famous and somewhat humorous chapter in Australian history, often cited in discussions about the absurdity of military operations, as well as the resilience of nature in the face of human intervention. The event has become a cultural symbol of the unexpected and has been the subject of numerous jokes, documentaries, and discussions. The victory of the emus over the military is often used in pop culture to represent the folly of overestimating human power over nature. It's also a reminder of how the natural world can sometimes outsmart even the best laid plans. In summary, the Great Emu War was a curious and comical conflict where the Australian military tried to defeat a large population of emus. But despite their modern weaponry, the emus proved to be too fast and elusive. The war ended in failure for the soldiers, and the emus continued to roam freely in Western Australia.